Hey, welcome everybody to the May 2022 Fairmede Hilltop Neighborhood Council meeting. I want to thank you all for coming, and tonight is kind of a school night. We have the superintendent of West Contra Costa Unified School District. We have District 4 Representative Demetrio Gonzalez-Hoy, and we're expecting the principal from Highland Elementary. And we have our beat officer here with all the crime stats. So before we start the meeting, I was wondering if we can all bow our heads for a moment in prayer for the kids that were killed in Texas, and the 2 teachers. Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody, appreciate it. God bless the kids and the teachers. Well, let's get the party going. I know the Warriors are playing tonight, so everybody's anxious to get home and watch the end of it. So perhaps we can get our Officer Galloway up here, and you can talk about what's going on in our neighborhood.
Hello, I'm Officer Galloway, Richmond Police Department.
Can you use the microphone?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So recently, within the last 30 days, lost property is 1. We've only had 1. Property thefts have only been 7. And we had 1 homicide, and that was pretty much it as far as our stats. So, anybody have any questions? Yeah.
You say it was 1 homicide again?
Yes. Yes.
I have something I should enlighten you. I'm not sure whether the police has anything to do with this. Could be a post office problem. But one of my neighbors called me today stating that someone had put a vacation hold on their mail illegally without their consent. And they wanted to know what to do about it. She did talk to her carrier. The carrier hadn't seen them in a while and thought they had been on vacation. They had been having some medical problems, so they weren't around. However, the person who put the hold on their mail has yet to confiscate the mail because the hold was for a month. So she was able to contact her carrier. He was able to get her mail to them. So the person who had been in possession of their mail didn't hold it. So is this something that the police department should be aware of, or is this postal?
Most of this postal.
I thought so, but I just thought I would mention it.
Yeah.
And for anybody else here in the audience, if for some reason you do not receive any mail for a period of time, be sure to talk to your carrier to see what's going on. Like my neighbor and the carrier thought they were away. For a person to put a hold on that mail for a month, he probably had an idea what was going to be coming to a person's home within a month's period of time, how much mail, the type of mail, credit cards, other things. So he would have gone in and got their mail. Luckily, this didn't happen. So get to know your carrier. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions in regards to the stats as far as you guys' neighborhood, or any concerns or questions that you guys need to address with me? Yeah.
First, I want to thank you guys for doing what you do, because I know they've already kind of stripped you guys down to bare bones. So I'm a teacher, so I believe in things that can happen. The only concern I was going to have, and I don't know how much you can impact this, is in the neighborhood where people are double parked and they're on those blind corners. I mean, I understand maybe we don't do it all the time, but is there a way of getting some support there? Because that's kind of like, that's kind of like you're at the mercy of the Lord. No, because you can't really see them. I mean, you have to go see them.
What's the time frame as far as when this occurs? What's the time frame? What's the time frame of when this occurs?
It happens often. It happens often, especially on Warriors Road. And so when you come off of Balloon, you make it right, going on the Warriors, blind corner, and even down leave that first stop sign and you make that turn, line corner, I know my wife and my daughter come to here often.
I mean, if you call the PD and just ask, if we're not on anything, I'll come and I'll move them. I'll give them a ticket, either one. I'll take care of it.
No, I appreciate it. That's just one where, you know, it's kind of like, you don't really want to be in conflict with people. So, you
Yeah.
know, I know you guys are already, like I said, they're numbers.
Just call me and I'll come take care of it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you aware of a lady selling beverage? I think it's at Lancaster and Aberdeen, and I heard that she's selling, liquor or something on the.
I was not aware of that at all. Where, is there an address or anything specific where I can,
Pardon?
is there an address or anything specific?
They're just sitting on the corner there by the bus stop, where I saw them one day.
Okay, yeah, no, I wasn't made aware. If you please call our PD and just make us aware of it, I mean, we could at least make contact with them.
Well, I would have to see her here, and I don't really live that area. But I've heard talk about her being, and she's shaking her head like she was.
So any other questions? Well, thank you, officer
No problem.
Callaway, for coming in, and be safe out there.
Will do. Thank you. You guys have a good one, okay?
Take care. Thank you. For those of you that haven't had a chance to see the newsletter, there's an article in the newsletter explaining to you that the Richmond Police Department is shorthanded. They're short-staffed, so they're not going to be able to field the calls that they used to. Unfortunately, for a multitude of reasons, they're having trouble recruiting, and people are going out injured, and the Reimagining Task Force has cut their budget, and so they're short-staffed, so they can't answer the calls like they used to. So if you call them and they don't show up, there's a reason for that. So don't blame the police. It's not all their fault. That being said, I see that Principal Mallard from our local elementary school has shown up, and if you don't mind coming up and saying a few things. For those of you old timers, Highland used to be Fairmede School, where I went to. Talk about how the school is doing.
Hello everyone, how are you? How are you keeping? I hope everyone is all
Microphone.
well. I don't know if I need to, I've got a teacher voice.
This.
Okay. Let me see. Whew, what a year. 8 days left. And who's counting? It's definitely been a year for a lot of learning for everybody. We've really come a long way from where we were to where we are. It was a difficult start to the year. I had to start in the classroom for 6 weeks, so it was difficult to kind of get up and running. But once we got going, we're doing pretty well, actually. You know, we have still some things we have to fix, and you know, I see our superintendent here, so we'll be having a chat. And he's been great, I have to say. Anytime I ask, they've come over, so I really appreciate Demetrio and Dr. Hurst for coming over, helping me, because with your input on the traffic and whatnot, the drop-off has been phenomenal, so thank you very much for that. So we did make some changes that I felt were really needed. Our drop-off and pickup was, it was hard to watch it because it was a couple of near misses. People were not following directions and, you know, just coming in and just trying to get their kids and go. And we couldn't afford that. Our babies are precious, so I take that seriously. So when the parents drop them off to me, they're my responsibility, and I take that very, very seriously, like they're my own. So when I saw some of these things going on, I said, we're not having that. So, and I asked for their input, and it was great. So it was a really big team effort. So that was really a great success. We are going to continue one entrance, one exit for the school site. I think it's really important for safety. As we see, a lot of things are going on, so we're trying to ensure that we stay safe. There's still some things that we need to get fixed and figure out how to navigate some of the entrances. But that's a conversation that I will be having with some folks, and we'll get it taken care of. So I'm not too worried about that. I actually love this community. This is my second year here. I spent 4 years at Lake and 10 years at Coronado. So coming up here is like a utopia. So I really, really enjoyed. I'm getting to know the community. I'm out in the mornings and I'm out in the afternoons, and I click-clack down the hallway every day with the kids, and I'm out in the yard. So it's good to see them and build those relationships. You know, and we love, you know, you guys to start coming in and volunteering and helping us out. Now that we're starting to see an ease in our COVID. So, you know, I'm just excited to be there and see how far we're going to go, and with all these changes, not all, there's some changes coming through the district, different programs that we're going to implement, see how they're going to support us and support our students to grow and thrive. So we've got great kids. We really do. The kids here are just fantastic. Very pleasant. We had leadership come visit the site. We do this once a month, and all the comments were like, oh my gosh, your children are so pleasant, and they've come up and they were curious about what we were doing, and they were very respectful. I said, well, we've built that. That started before I got here. I just want to continue that. So that's been really, really nice. Anyone have any questions? Or yes?
I understand that you have students from Brazil there.
We do, not as much. Some have gone back. We do have some though, but not as many as we used to.
Back to Brazil?
Back to Brazil, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Our population is changing somewhat. We've got about maybe 60% Latino, about 20% African American, and then others are Asian, Middle Eastern. So it's changing a little bit. We do have some from Brazil, but not as many. That can be difficult sometimes when we're doing IEPs to get somebody to speak Portuguese, but we've been able to manage. So, but it's good. Yeah, our population changing slightly, but this is a great neighborhood. It's nice and quiet, and people are respectful, and you know, it's great. Great to come to work every day. So, any questions for me?
Wow, everybody really wants to get to that Warriors game, huh?
Yeah, I guess.
Right? So for those of you who aren't aware, the city and the school district is broken up into districts, and we're both in District 4 when it comes to the city, and we're also in District 4 when it comes to the school district. And so tonight we have Demetrio Gonzalez Way, who represents District 4, our area, and Carriage Hills and some of the other areas, May Valley. And so if you'd like to come up and talk about what's going on in District 4.
Thank you so much, Ardo. Good evening, everyone. I'm actually going to introduce our superintendent because he's going to give you a presentation on everything that's happening in the district, and then I will come back up with him for questions if you have questions specifically for the board. But my name is Demetrio Gonzalez-Hoy. I represent Area 4, which encompasses all of Hilltop, part of Northeast San Pablo, all of El Sobrante, North Richmond, everything in between, and El Cerrito in our school district, practically. So I would be more than happy and honored to introduce Dr. Hurst, who is our current superintendent. He's been in the job now for, well, probably feels 10 years, but he's been in the job for a year as of 2 weeks ago, and he's doing a really great job. So please, I'll pass it on to him, and I'll come back up.
Thank you so much, sir. As Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy shared, my name is Dr. Hurst. I'm the superintendent for West Contra Costa Unified School District. It's such an honor to be here with you. I want to acknowledge another trustee that we have here as well, Trustee Smith-Folds. I was just sharing with Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy that she's so impressive. Seems like she's at every single meeting that happens in the district. I'm not sure how she finds the time with 3 girls, but she's amazing. So I wanted to recognize her. Thank you for being here, ma'am. And then, of course, Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy. Thank you for being here, sir, as well. So I do have a presentation. I'm going to go through them as swiftly as I can because I know that there's some questions. If we can go to the next slide. Just introducing myself a little bit, just giving you a little bit of background. I am coming here by way of Washington State. I was in Washington State for 5 years. I was a superintendent there. This is my 24th year in education. However, this is my second career. I was in the military, in the Marine Corps, and I served in Desert Storm. So it was an honor to be there, serve my country. But I always wanted to work with kids. I knew I had a talent in mathematics. So I left the Marine Corps, finished my bachelor's degree in mathematics, and then had a specialty in computer science. And I started off as a teacher in the San Diego, North County area. And I worked in a suburban district. It was an affluent district. And I went from there to San Diego Unified, and I went to a community very similar to Richmond, San Pablo, a really tough community. But what I realized is the difference between the two districts. It was devastating for me going from an affluent neighborhood where really teachers had all the resources to a district or a school where there was literally no resources. And I can share with you that I liken that to my experience here because I too believe that we are severely lacking in resources in our district. I left San Diego and I went up the road about 30 miles and I live in Oceanside, which is really a military community. And I was a principal there of a large comprehensive high school, larger than our high schools here. My high school was 2,400 students. And I was there for a time being. I was a principal for about 10 years. And then I became an associate superintendent. And then I came to Washington and now here. I have a wife and 2 amazing kids and 8 grandkids. So I wanted to just, yes, 8 grandkids. They all are either in Texas or in Southern Cal and Oceanside area. So if we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to share some things with you regarding safety. You've been hearing a lot about, I'm sure, what's been happening at our schools. And I'll share with you that I think that there has been a safety plan, but because of the incidents that have happened, especially over the past several months around weapons, it has caused us to really rethink what we're doing with safety. But again, I'll share with you, and I will always be transparent with you, that we do lack resources. So that's one of the things that I struggle with being the superintendent of our district, and plus our financial situation and our crisis. It is a reality, so that plays a part to everything. But one of the things I'll share with you that we've been talking about a couple of different strategies. Long term, which is really what we think is going to get to the bottom of what's happening in our schools with our kids. Especially what we hear about happening across our country, the devastation in Texas as well. You know, what happened with that 18-year-old caused him to go into the school to do that. But we have kids, other districts, communities have kids just like that. I was just looking at a letter today, and we have like the software that can pick up on different words that kids are saying. So the letter was actually sent to me, and it was talking, the student was talking about, you know, that he has this craving to cause harm. So I'm glad we have that software, and most districts do have that software that can pick up on that, but like, what are we doing with the kids? And that's part of our long-term strategy, is really getting them the mental health support that they need. So that's our end game, our long-term strategy, and we really believe focusing on social-emotional learning. those types of supports, social workers, focusing on climate and culture, that's the piece that we really have to focus on. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some short-term strategies that we have in place. If we can go to the next slide. So this slide is really talking about the big concern that we have in our district, and it's really around the number of weapons. You can see, and it doesn't help when we say this, it doesn't feel good, that even this year it's a little less than the previous year. You can see on the slides. But we don't want to hear that there's weapons in our schools at all. I can tell you that there's a lot of different conversations and beliefs around what should happen. I process all of those conversations, but I share with you that I try to have a collaborative approach and engage people instead of just saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that in our district. But I do listen to a lot of voices. We found 12 weapons have been confiscated in our schools this year, which is a concern. And especially when I look at the type of weapons that have been confiscated, it's a big concern. So if we can go to the next slide. I talked about long-term strategies. Let's go to the next slide. So again, I'll share with you the long-term strategies is the big bang for our buck, which is really where we identify kids and we identify supports and we get help for our students. Short-term strategies is really what can we do in the physical environment to protect our kids and protect our adults. So one of the things you'll see is really trying to drill down with communications and getting better, trying to get better. I take feedback from anyone. Some of you in this room have emailed me. I try to be very responsive as well and send feedback immediately to people that needs to get the feedback. But communications is at the top of our list. How do we get better in how we communicate to all stakeholders? We've also created this safety checklist. So what we have done is any director, any person, even the superintendent, we have a safety committee as well across the district. We go into our schools and we have this checklist and we're checking for certain things. So when you go into a school, one, making sure that the access points are really tight. So we want to make sure that we don't have people just arbitrarily gaining entrance into our campuses. We have Mr. Booker, who is over our safety security, and we have other people that's on the safety committee, and they're walking around all of these schools and they're doing assessments on these schools and they're trying to figure out, here's the gaps, and here's what we have to do. And then we have this person named Louis Freeze, who's our chief of maintenance and operations, and his job is to help to close those gaps. Now, again, as I shared, I'm going to be very real with you. The issue is resources. So where do we get the resources to close all these gaps? So that's one of the things that we're really trying to figure out. Are there grants out there? Grants where we can get cameras, or grants where we can get the springs on the gates, or grants that we can get the buzzers and the ringers, or like the ring camera on all of our doors. All of that costs money. Can we use bond money? But we have bond money that's for our buildings as well. So we have to be very careful. But the reality is there are some gaps and we have to close those gaps, and safety has to be a priority. So with that checklist, there's about 20 different things that we go through. It's on a sort of like a Google spreadsheet. Go through, make sure that this is done, this is done, this is done. If it's not being done, there's an immediate conversation that's happening with the principal, with campus security as well. A big focus is at the high schools and the middle schools. That's where we're seeing most of our big issue problems, the big fights, the weapons as well, the guns. coverage of our campus security, that's really big. We do have a roster now that has a list of all of our campus security at all of our secondary sites, where they're supposed to be, the time they're supposed to be there, when they're taking lunch. That's huge as well for us. Because when I come on campus, if I don't see someone in a spot, then I know I can look at my list. Well, this X person is supposed to be here, and if they're not there, I can have a conversation with the principal. So part of this is accountability as well. How am I holding the whole system accountable? And yes, I am going through myself and using this checklist to making sure that the whole system is being held accountable. And yes, I hold these meetings, and it's not typical that the superintendent would, be involved in like some of these operational things, but this is an easy time, and I need to be involved, and I need to lead in a way where people know that I'm being active and trying to be proactive as well. Lanyards is a big deal. I know we've had this policy written, but it has not been enforced, and it's really trying to shift everyone's mindset around we need to know who the kids are that's on our campus. So yes, you're going to wear a lanyard, and yes, you're going to wear this ID tag like I'm wearing right here. That is the expectation for adults. That's an expectation for our secondary kids, but now the conversation is going all the way down to our little ones, going to the next year, and that everyone's has that expectation that they're wearing the lanyard and ID. And then one of the things now that we're doing, we don't have a huge, humongous central office staff, which the central office is on Bissell. But because we have such a shortage of teachers, or because of these safety issues we're having, time to time we have to just stop what we're doing and just send everybody out to support principals. Like Ms. Ballard was saying, being in the classroom, teaching, she shouldn't be doing that. But we have a shortage of teachers, so she has to do that. But from time to time, we have sent our staff, including myself. I've subbed as a teacher, I've subbed as a principal as well in the district, and we do what we need to do. That's our reality. Going to the next slide. So this is the example of what I was sharing with you of the safety checklist that we go through. So it's like a Google form. You can pull it up on your phone. Our safety committee is going to all of these schools. Again, the focus is on our secondary school sites. And like I said, there's about 20 items that we're going through and we're checking through. When you see something in red, that means it's not being done. And that means we go back to that principal, we go and have that conversation with the assistant principal, the safety committee, and we try to tighten it up, hold people accountable. And I'm being involved to let them know that I'm not going to let this just sit by the wayside, that it's important that we're doing all of this stuff. We need to make sure that our sites are safe. So those long-term strategies, yes, that is our end game. We need to do that. But certainly the short term has to be done. One of the pieces I'll say for the long-term strategies is we have an opportunity to possibly get a grant, which Senator Skinner's office is a $15 million grant. We're trying to get all of our learning community, internal stakeholders to write her emails to support us, because that $15 million would help us to go toward the long-term strategies, to help the social workers, to help with the climate and culture as well, social emotional learning training. Next slide. And then I'll share with you about COVID safety. So we were early on one of those districts that had a mandate, mandate for a vaccination rate, and then we have a high rate for our students, 12 and over, 87%, and then adults is 90%. But I think one of the things we'll share with you is that we try to work with our labor partners. We try to collaborate on the direction that we're headed in together. We've been more successful doing that recently. Recently also you heard, or probably have heard, that we have extended or the board has approved to extend the vaccine mandate to align with the state's date of July 2023. The next slide. And then just some information on the budget. Just the governor's May revise. And you can see here the May revise includes $300 billion approximately in the budget. And it's relief for different areas. You can see here from rising inflation to ensure public safety, address homelessness, transform public education, and that's in bold, and combat climate change as well. So that's all part of his May revise. And then also, we need to know that June 15th is a big date for us when we'll have some finality from the legislators when that budget is adopted. And then we can go to the next slide. This slide is just a pictorial portion of what I just shared with you. So the same thing. Can you go to the next slide? So I think some of the key pieces that I wanted to share with you from the governor's proposed budget. In January, the governor proposed $8.8 billion in major ongoing investments in Prop 98, which funds education. But then for our after-school programs, summer enrichment programs, which is our expanded learning opportunity programs, the ELOP, that was the largest proposed investment in the budget, which is about $3.4 billion. Then the second largest was in our local control funding formula. One of the big pieces was the COLA, and you can see in the graph it says 6.56%. Next slide. So for us, it was great news hearing the May revise from our governor. That means for us, it's about $8 million. However, what I will share with you is that we were already in a situation where we have a financial advisor, and if you were following the board meetings, you heard our CBO talk about certifications, and there's 3 levels. There is a negative certification, which means that we cannot meet our obligations in paying our bills. There's a positive certification, and we are in, and then there's a qualified certification, but we are in negative certification. And we were in negative certification twice. And after that second time, we were assigned a financial advisor from the county. And what's been happening in our district is before we have a board meeting, I will meet with the financial advisor, I'll meet with the county, I'll meet with the CBO of the county, and I'll meet with my CBO or interim CBO, and we actually go over the agenda first before it's even presented to the board. And what they do is they go over all the expenditures, and they advise us before it even goes to the board. But what the May revise, which is good news, is projected that we'll be able to come out of the negative certification and be qualified. And then in planning, and we'll have to hear more from our CBO on this, the hopes is going into next year that we'll be able to move into a positive certification. And then I wanted to talk on the next slide just a little bit about goals. So it's really important that you understand that there has been work happening, even in all the turmoil. We have a chief academic officer, her name is Ms. Martin, Marisha Martin, and her team has been working with our principals on 4 goals. They've been working on this all year, the instructional goals. Like, what are we doing with our students? How are we improving academics and student learning? So one of the first goals is success in the early years. I've been a big proponent of early literacy. It has to start early. And we really want to focus on our little kids and making sure that they're ready for kindergarten to level the playing field. And we do know, based on the research, if our students are starting off behind, they're going to stay behind, and especially with the summer, because you have something that's called the summer slide. So what's happening with our kiddos is that they come in behind, they have the summer, they get further behind because of the summer slide and that research. They never really catch up. So that's a big focus for us. And then we have whole child, empowered, supported, safe, connected, and engaged. And that leads into safety, but also leads into social emotional learning and those supports that I was just sharing with you earlier. Critical thinking and mastery of content, those are more academic focus goals. And then the last goal is readiness for college and career in life. And then the next slide. So this is tough to look at, and I've seen this data again and again. And we have a STAR assessment, which is an assessment that aligns to Common Core assessments that's given at the end of the year. You know, we are aware of our Common Core standards, and there's assessments that are given at the end of the year, but there's also assessments that are given at different points throughout the year. And it sort of tells us where our kids are. But you can see over the years, and I've looked at about 10 years worth of data on our district, and it's not too different. When you look at this one, you can see the blue, with the one on top, but then goes to the bottom, is mathematics. So you can see about 24% proficient. So the other flip side of that is about 75% that are not proficient. And then when you look at reading, you can see sort of the path there, 36%, which really means about 64% that are not proficient in reading. So you can see that we have our work cut out for us. As I look back a number of years, this data has not changed. It's been profoundly the same, which is very concerning for me, like what's been happening with teaching and learning in our district over a number of years. Next slide. The next several slides just kind of breaks it down by ethnicity. So you can see the big groups that are really concerning, and not that any of it is good, but I want to say this as well, and I could put it in context. We do have pockets of success in our district. You can go into classrooms and see some really exciting teaching. But I hear one of our trustees say all the time about, like, I don't want to mess it up, but she doesn't give stickers. She just doesn't give out stickers or rewards easily or something like that. So my message is, yes, there's some great things happening, pockets of success in our district, but when I look at this data, I become extremely concerned, even at some of our groups that are performing at 60% or 66 or 56%. That still means that about 34% are not proficient. It's a lot of students. So that means we got a lot of work to do. But if you notice, our Black students and our Latinx students are struggling in mathematics and reading. And again, I will share with you that is consistent over about a 10-year period. And it's about the same. Same thing in mathematics, Black and Latinx students on the next slide. If you go to the next slide, you can see the concern here is around attendance. The state defines chronic absenteeism as missing 18 more days. I can share with you in the research that I've done, and everyone really knows, when you miss 4 days out of school, it's hard to catch up. It's hard to catch up, and the state says 18 days is chronically absent. Well, it's almost impossible to catch up after 18 days. And you're really kind of sealing your fate. But if you look at these rates, again, you see African American students, 34.8% of our African American or black students have missed more than 18 days. Now, I've looked at the data, and we have students in excess of 40 days who have missed 40 days, even more than that. It's hard to catch up, impossible to catch up. And again, all the data that I see, it says after 4 or 5 days, it's practically impossible to catch up. And then you see Hispanic, you see Pacific Islanders is 35%, but it's a small population. Big ones again are the Latinx and African American population. That's really concerning. So next slide. So part of breaking the cycle is understanding the change process. And this is the conversation that I've been having with staff. So for me, I believe the board brought me here because it is about change. And it's time for a change. And you have to really understand the change process. And what I'm trying to share with everyone, that it is systematic, it is a process, it is being consistent. And change doesn't happen overnight, it doesn't happen in 1 year. There are certain things that can change in 1 year if everything lines up. One of the key things you keep hearing me saying that has to line up is resources. But in the ideal world, if you have resources and you have all these other pieces, then you can really institute change pretty quickly. But I really understand the change process, and I understand, how do you define where you are? I understand our current reality, which is 10 years worth of low academic performance, especially from certain groups. I understand that certain kids are being over-identified into special ed, especially black kids in our district. I understand that certain kids are being overly expelled, suspended as well, black kids and Latinx kids. So if I understand our current reality, my responsibility is to lead the community to get to our vision or our ideal state. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the last few minutes of this slide. So all of this is part of the work that we're doing right now, and it's all part of the change process. In the next slide. So we've been leading this process called the strategic planning, which is really exciting. I've kind of painted the picture for you that this is a district that is in trouble right now. So financially, over the past several years, we've not done a great job with our money. I'm just being very honest with you. We have an interim CBO that is having the right conversations, doing the right things to get us on track. I think the May revise is going to help us do that as well. But I think this process of looking at our vision, which is what do we see ourselves or our students in the next 5 to 10 years? So we have to redesign our district so that our students are having better outcomes. And I painted that picture for you that right now we don't have great outcomes. Pockets of success, but not great outcomes overall. So vision is something that we're having a conversation about right now. We've been having meetings over the past 2 months in different areas. Our mission, like what are our core beliefs? What are our values? What's our why? What's our purpose? Why do we exist? What do we want to do really, really well in West Contra Costa Unified School District for our students? Our core values, how we treat people, how we talk to people. Those are conversations that we're having. Everything that you see on this list, these are conversations that are taking place right now. Our equity statement, our anti-racist statement, it's all happening now because we are trying to rewrite the script of education here in West Contra Costa Unified School District. We have to. It's a big lift. And I just had this conversation this week with community members saying that I cannot do this work alone. It's not work that can be done by a superintendent or even by a district. It takes everyone, all of you, to really join in. It takes a lot of resources to make it happen. But this is the direction we're headed in. Next slide. So this kind of leads me to kind of the end of the presentation. So we've had community meetings in all of our areas, our families of schools. The first session was all about the students. We brought students in. We wanted to listen to them. We wanted to ask them questions. What was their experience, K through 12? What advice do you have for the adults as we're thinking about redesigning this system? And I'm talking about rewriting the script here. They gave us some feedback. We had some people to synthesize all of what was said. We brought it to the second session. The second session was really about what is mission, what is vision, what is a graduate profile, the skills that we want our students to have. And then synthesize that. The third session, which was this past week, we really talked about, we have some sample statements based on all this community involvement. There hasn't been a whole lot of community members, but it's been enough to have rich and deep conversations and really painting a picture on the statements of vision, an inspiring vision of what we want to head toward in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's where we are right now. We're going to take all this information to the board at the end of June for approval. And then we'll start talking about how do we get there? How do we get the funds as well? That wasn't part of these conversations early on. But after the board approves, we come back in August, we start talking about how do we get to our vision? What needs to be in place? What resources do we need to tap into to make sure that we get there as well? And then finally, this last slide is really, if I had to share with people just my work in really revamping a system, it's really revolved around a few different pieces. You have to bring parents and community members into the conversation, which is why you see down at the bottom, parent engagement and training. That has to happen. It says parent, but I really mean community involvement. You have to really deal with the little ones. You have to really deal with literacy. Our kids have to be able to read before they get into kindergarten. So that has to happen. If you deal with those two pieces, we're off to a really good start. And then you have to really think differently about the classroom experience. We cannot continue to have these classroom experiences where teachers or educators are just up in front of our kids and just talking to our kids and doing the guided practice, the independent practice, and then some sort of assessment at the end of the classroom. There has to be more for our students. Our world is changing. We have not kept up in education with the changes in our world. So what I've shared with everyone is we have to be creative, innovative in our thinking. We have to think about experiences like, how do we teach our students how to solve problems? Like design thinking. That's a real research-based practice that we can teach our students. And that way, any problem that they come across, if they understand the fundamental steps of how to solve problems, they can apply that to anything. And then you see up there problem-based learning, which is people say hands-on learning or trades or pathways. So how do we bring those experiences into our students? Because I've been in systems where you walk into the classroom and you have problem or project-based learning or these trades or pathways, and they're tied to the standards, and you don't see kids with their heads down on the desk. You see kids that are excited, they're passionate, they want to learn, they want to be there, the attendance increases as well. So that's why you see that on the right side. Maker spaces, thinker spaces, STEM activities, every student becoming an engineer. That's one of my thoughts as well. Every student should be an engineer because we don't produce enough of our own engineers in the United States. And then skill development. So this is another big piece that I try to share with communities. It's really important to focus on skills because we know that skills are transferable. And if we can make sure that our kids have certain skills, they're more likely to be more successful in the world. So this is a picture of what's to come in our district. But it is a process that we're going through right now. So I shared a lot with you, and now I'm going to just open it up for questions. And I encourage my trustees to come up if they want to help me out.
For the West County, West Unified District, there's money allocated to the superintendent, for the supervisors, and for the county. They distribute the funds to each school district, like San Diego, Danville, or Pittsburgh, Antioch.
So I think
So
we're referring.
how are the funds distributed between the districts? Is it through the county supervisors?
So our money is based on our ADA, so our average daily attendance, and it comes from a few sources. It comes from the federal government, it comes from the state as well, and local levies also. So one of the things you need to know about our district, and most districts across the nation, California we're declining in enrollment. And the number of students as well, we're losing students. So I believe we used to be a district that was 30,000 or more, and we're right around 26,000, a little bit more than 26,000. So that's where we get our money from.
But the county does not provide us any funds. We are in conversations right now with the county about possibly getting some Measure X funds to pay for some of our adult school education, but we're still in conversations with them around that. But yeah, all of our funding comes from the state or the federal government, except for our bonds, which our communities pay for. We do have a very large bond program, which Don is one of our experts in our district about bonds. But yeah, apart from that, we also have a parcel tax, which is also collected from local taxes.
Here and then here.
I've got a number of questions. I don't want to hog everything, so don't let me do that. And thank you very much for the presentation. I attend almost every school board meeting from start to finish, and I've learned more about the education part of our district tonight than I've learned all year. I mean, you didn't talk about vaccines or mandates or any of the other stuff that's been flooding our meetings. I appreciated that part of it. But on with our first question here. With a loss of nearly 3,000 students, the funding from the state, the ADA, as you mentioned, could be several tens of millions of dollars less than what is needed. And between this year's budget deficit and the projected deficit for next year, we're looking at nearly $200 million. The County Board of Education has determined that the district is no longer a going concern and is at risk of insolvency. Maybe you can elaborate on your plan to make sure that we don't flirt with bankruptcy again. I'm sorry, from what I see in the district, it's kind of run like my house. You're spending more money than you're bringing in.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, sir. It's a big question. So one of the big pieces, like I was sharing, is how do you really solve the problem? Is really ADA, like increasing the enrollment, increasing attendance as well. So I alluded to that in my responses. So one, how do you really market the district, and how do you really attract people? So I can tell you what's happening now in our district. There's a reason why people are leaving. So when you have a lack of resources, a lack of finances, you have a lack of staffing, that plays to declining enrollment. So how do we address that? So it's back to those ideas that I was sharing with you. So people are attracted to a district when there's exciting things happening and there's achievement that's happening as well. So part of the strategy, Don and everyone else, is to do and be a part of everything I just said. We have to turn it around for our district. We have to follow the strategic planning process. We have to implement an exciting vision. We have to market ourselves. We have to attract a talent pool, skilled talent pool, teachers, employees overall, support staff, administrators, leaders at the district office as well. So that's part of it. And then part of it is the instructional program. I mentioned charter schools. When you go to even the California Charter School website, they do a good job of marketing their schools. And I'm not saying I'm a proponent, but they do have a good marketing program. That we don't do that. We don't market ourselves. And then you have other districts that do a good job of having X number of programs that's really exciting for kids. And what I always say is that education is the commodity. So parents are looking for the best for their kids. So what we're trying to do is to bring in more programs for our kids that are exciting and that they're going to engage in, bringing kids to our schools. So part of it is in this strategy that I'm talking about, Don, just the whole strategic planning process. Attracting adults, attracting our kids through a comprehensive instructional program. I'm not sure if you want to add something.
Thank you. I mean, I think that Dr. Hurst kind of just mentioned and envisioned the long-term strategy of attracting more students to our schools. I think in the short term right now, him and his staff are really looking at they're having tough conversations about areas to cut, right, in order to have our budget be in qualified certification in June. Thankfully, as he mentioned in his presentation, the funding is looking better from the state for next year. So that means less cuts to have to be made. His staff also just got a $30 million grant for community schools, which is great because it's not just going to attract more students to our schools by providing more resources, but it's also going to help with our budget. And like we mentioned, we are waiting to hear from Senator Skinner's office for about $15 million for supports around safety. So hopefully they'll come through as well. And then all of that adds to hopefully having a positive budget for next year.
And I'll just elaborate on that just a little bit. Now that you said that, it brought up something. So part of our process also is looking at every expenditure, every consultant, every program. And I shared with you that right now everything goes through that financial advisor. So we don't, and everything goes also through the board. And they question everything as well that is being spent, especially through general funds. So we're being very cautious now on everything. I've also shared with the staff that everything now in the future has to align to our vision. So nothing comes into our system if there's not any alignment. And plus our board's not going to allow anything to come in and and the county won't as well. So I think if we keep those processes and protocols in place, it will be better suited in the future to come out of this negative certification and then to qualify, and then in the future to positive. Here than here.
So I'm a member of Defend Public Education now. We've been around for a while. Demetrio is familiar with the group, and we warned the district about a good 5 years ago that charter schools would be the death of the district. There's also a phenomenon called gentrification through taxation. Homeowners are tired of taxation. They're tired of parcel taxes. That's going to be a difficult road to go down if you plan on using that as a strategy. But I'd like to know how much are the charter schools actually costing the district? Our estimate was over $30 million.
This is a great question, and I think that Defend Public Education now has really supported us bringing this to the attention of the community. We do have 14 charter schools in our district that have surfaced over the last really 15 years in West Contra Costa. And unfortunately, because of the lack of education that we have seen in our community, they came in selling these goods to families, right, that they could do a better job than our schools at educating their kids. Parents have to make tough choices, right, especially when you see the data that we see. But they are taking a lot of the funds because every kid that leaves our schools is about $12,000 to $14,000 less that goes into our 54 schools. So right now, even though they are also seeing a decrease in enrollment, we are losing about $28 million to charter schools. That number is a very conservative number. Many other individuals make the argument it's higher than that, about $41 million. But the 28 million came from a study that we did 3 years ago in our district that was independently made to show us what the number was. So that's also adding to where we are, because on top of everything, we also have to provide facilities for charter schools unless they can provide them themselves. So many of the charter schools, we have to provide those facilities, and we have to pay for a lot of the things that go into those facilities. So all of that adds to the expense of charter schools. Anything you'd like to add before?
And then one last thing, I understand that back then you couldn't sell any property that you had, any dormant property, because the charter schools would get first dibs on it. Is that still the case?
Well, at this point, I'm not sure. We do have a 7-Eleven committee that has started the work about looking at our vacant lots. Don is shaking his head. Maybe it hasn't started, but we're supposed
I'm on
to
the
start.
committee.
Oh, okay, well, it's supposed to start very soon, which is going to look at selling the properties that we have in order to bring in more revenue. Properties, that are not being used and that are empty without a school. We have a few, so part of the idea is to sell those, but we have already prioritized and mentioned in our strategic planning for that they would not be sold to charter schools. Right now, the board is, I think, pretty united, at least most of us, that we wouldn't do that because we are worried about the increased number of charter schools in our district. We do have a charter moratorium at the moment. And what that means is that we will not accept any more charter schools in our district. So the current board has that as a priority as well, which is, I think, part of why we haven't seen also any more charter petitions come in, at least since the new board got elected.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I've pretty much asked what I was going to ask. My question is, and just you probably answered it, but I need to hear it again. Do the charter schools come under the school funds of the public schools? They have access to whatever money that the public schools, that we vote for, homeowners vote for the school funds? The charter schools have access to that money?
That's a complicated question. No and yes. So you pay for a parcel tax and you pay for bonds. Parcel tax, which we get about $10 million, that they do get some of that. Charter schools, they get some of the funding from the parcel tax. From the bond, they don't get money from the bond, but we do use bond funds, correct me if I'm wrong, and Don, you can also jump in, for facilities needs. So things that they need like portables, because they might grow, we pay for that. Now we also have applied for bonds and grants through the state to build facilities for them. So we have co-written grants for them to have those facilities. The argument has been that instead of applying for those grants for us, we have had to unfortunately do it for them so that we don't have to provide the facilities. Because one of the things that we have been worried about is co-locating a charter school with one of our public schools. Because we've done it a couple times. Right now, Kennedy High School is co-located with a charter school. And what that does is that we have to give facilities, for example, for our high school students to this charter school, which is elementary and middle school. We have to give them classrooms, we have to give them part of the gym, we have to give them different things. So that's what we're trying not to do. So unfortunately, we have to give them their own facility, or we have to build a facility with them. So we're doing that right now with Calabar Charter School. They're going close to here, actually. I can't remember the location.
Terra Hills.
Terra Hills, thank you. And then with Greenwood Academy in Richmond, we built part of the facility for LPS, which I don't remember what it says.
Leadership.
Leadership, thank you. So that they have their own facility there. So we're unfortunately having to do that, but your bond funds that you're paying for right now don't go to the charter schools unless we have to use it for that.
If I can correct you on that,
Please.
when we pass the charter schools, when it's on the ballot, it specifically lists which schools. And no charter schools are listed on there, so the bond money cannot go towards the charter schools,
Thank you, Don.
even for portables or something like that. So it comes out of our classrooms to take care of those portables and other expenses on there.
So
You
they
see,
just
this is why we have Don
shuffle
here.
it around. They just shuffle the money around.
Exactly, because that money has to come from somewhere, right?
Under the cover,
So,
under the table,
yes.
that kind of stuff.
Oh,
Well, maybe not so much under the table.
Well, no, they're real bold with it, they just throw it across the table now. So the charter schools come under the, let's say, Contra Costa School District, are they governed?
No, sorry, would you like to answer?
They're
So the
not.
criteria that the public schools are asked to do under the school district, the charter schools don't have to go by that, but they can get the money, basically.
So when you say govern, can you explain yourself a little bit more?
Rules and regulations that public schools have to go by under
No, no,
the
ma'am.
school district, the charter schools don't have to go by
No,
those,
ma'am.
but they can get the money.
Yes.
They're privately owned and publicly funded.
So our 54 schools are led by our superintendent, who is then held accountable by your school board, right? We have 2 here, our 5, and then you, right? The charter schools have their own board, which is not accountable to anyone except for their funders or themselves, right? So a lot of the time they are elected, but most of the time they're not, right? They're just chosen by whoever starts the charter school. So that's a big difference. Now, they are held accountable technically by us if we approve that charter school, but we don't attend the board meetings. We don't know the day-to-day things. So the only thing that we hold them accountable for is if there are violations, which are reported to us. Now, if we say no to a charter school, they have the ability to go to the county and appeal the decision, which many times since I've been in our district where they have been allowed to then open without even our accountability, which is very minimal. Now, if they lose in the county says, no, you can't open there, which has also happened, then they get to go to the state, and then they can also say, yes, you can open or not. Most likely, until very recently, they were just saying yes to any charter school that went all the way to the state. And we have one that has been approved by the state in that matter.
They're just basically being taken advantage of, sound like to me.
In many ways, yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Don.
Thank you. First, I appreciate you touching on safety at our schools. I mean, these days, especially after yesterday, it's even more important than ever. And I don't expect you to know this because you're just new to this area, but 13 years ago, we had a gang rape at Richmond High School. It made national news, worldwide news, in fact. Okay? And the solution is let's put on cameras. We installed over 1,500 cameras. I mention this because you mentioned cameras. All right? At a cost of several $1 million. The problem with cameras, they're great if you catch somebody and you want to prosecute them. Maybe if you can actually see something. But unless you've got somebody to monitor the 1,500 screens real time, they're not much good. And we don't have that. We didn't have that. So most of those cameras fell into disuse on that. But, especially again with all the guns that we've seen at our schools, having school resource officers on campus was always a touchy subject. It's also a very expensive subject, costing them more than $300,000 per school. But very vocal members of our community have expressed to the board and staff that they feel their children are safer without a police presence at the schools than they would be with the police on campus. And the understanding that even here in West County, we've experienced far too many instances of guns and active shooters on or around our schools. With early April, we had 2, De Anza and El Cerrito High School. And further understanding that you work at the direction of the elected members of the Board of Education. Can you share with us your thoughts of how the district can keep our kids safe, aside from lanyards and more locks on the doors?
That's a pretty deep question there, Don. So I think embedded in that is a conversation, I believe, around SROs. So I'm going to just go back, and I don't want to rehash everything that I just shared with you, but we do as a district believe that we have a philosophy around how we're going to keep our students safe. Long-term strategy is only going to happen when we really address the needs of our students. So I'm going to go back to that conversation. You know, what's really the underlying behavior that's causing our students to act out or disrupt? And part of like acting out, as we know, like some kids will act out based on, you know, they haven't been in school, they don't know what's going on in class, so instead of being called on or confronted by a teacher or an adult, they choose to act out. So part of that goes back to the strategy around how do we engage differently with our kids? How do we motivate them? What's exciting happening in the classroom? So it goes back to really restructuring the learning experience. That's really going to really see the change. I mean, everything else that anybody else mentions, and I've heard it all since I've been here, from metal detectors to SROs, wands, you name it. Those are things through the research that has not been proven effective, to be very honest with you. So I'm going to touch on that though. But I will say the long-term strategy is the strategy. We have to work on changing how we're teaching, how kids are learning. We have to also work on the climate and the culture. So that's why this whole conversation around core values and how do we hold each other accountable for how we speak to one another and interact with one another, it's such an important conversation. And just a little bird walk. I've lived this in communities just like this where you have all of this turmoil that's happening, but you implement certain things, like the community implements certain things and they're invested. It has to be system-wide and you have to have teachers reinforcing it in the classroom. So everyone has to buy into this. But I've seen it change fast, like within a year, like a culture of violence to a culture of mutual respect. But it's really about the long-term strategy. It's not about these other things that you hear people talking about. So that's all I want to say first and foremost. But I also want to say there are people who are having a conversation about, let's just say, metal detectors. There is no definitive research that I've seen that supports that implementation of metal detectors is a deterrent. A weapon is going to keep your campus safer. This is what I would say about SROs also. I've been very transparent. I've always had a positive relationship with police in every other city that I've been in. And I've talked to all of the chiefs here in our cities as well, and I have a positive relationship. But as I started off sharing is I listen to people and I bring people into the conversation. So what I realized, the conversation about SROs, there's a couple of things that's happened before I got here. One is that resolution. That conversation needs to be addressed, needs to be discussed by our board of trustees. They need to engage in the conversation. They need to provide me with direction on that resolution. So that's one thing that needs to happen. If we want any type of relationship, that needs to be addressed first. And if we want to continue a relationship with police, then there needs to be a community-wide conversation, because there are dividing thoughts on that. And as a superintendent, I'm not going to just rush into that conversation. So to really answer your question, there's some relationships that we can engage in, but it needs to be a community-focused conversation around SROs. I don't believe in metal detectors. I don't believe that they're effective, and I've not seen any research that supports that. This real strategy are the strategies that I just shared with you initially, and those are the long-term strategies. That's how we're going to keep our campuses safe, climate and culture, teaching and learning. I see a hand back there in the back, sir.
So first of all, I want to just thank, because my daughter goes to higher elementary school, and I want to thank Ms. Mallard. I also want to thank her second grade teacher. Ms. Mallard was the first and second grade teacher. I know the class sizes were small. Forgetting the first grade teacher's name. Yeah, it's half codes now, but Ms. What was the one for kindergarten?
Miss Jones, Miss Sullivan.
Ms. Sullivan was our other teacher, so she has had great teachers. The only thing that I have a concern with, because I'm a teacher, there's two things I have a concern with, and hopefully you can address it. The first one was living in the Bay Area as a teacher, where you have to have a cost of living, that cost of living is just enormous. Why would somebody want to come put up with the headaches of somebody's child, and they're only making roughly $50,000 to $70,000 a year, and they can barely make it, and then they're under the stress of teaching. So that's the first question I would ask, and I see that even in communities like Hercules when I talk with a parent who says their son doesn't have a teacher for 2 classes. And then the other one is, why is it also we're not having expectations for the children to a point where when they come in, it's just business. Again, I don't have a problem with the social emotion, but when we get to class, that shouldn't stop the learning. In other words, after distance learning, if we were willing to put a vaccine mandate on parents, which you guys were willing to do, you guys voted for that, then why can't you, which really was saying to me, to the community, that if your child don't get vaccinated, your child got to stay at home. That's the way I take that. So that's the way I took it. And you know I blew about 10 air gaskets with you guys over it. So why can't we have those same expectations for the children in terms of just when they come to class, they're gonna take care of business, or they gotta go home. To me, that's the same thing to me. Now, I'm just saying that's how I see it for me. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I was trying to follow you with the questions, but let me see if I can tackle the first one, really about the profession and like why would people deal with just the headache. And I would say it really has to be a commitment, because as you look across the country, my daughter sends me articles all the time. She was a teacher. She's even left the profession now. But she sent me this article about superintendents in Texas, and she sent me one week, like 6 superintendents retiring from Texas, and she sends me another article. It's not just superintendents. She might be trying to get me to come to Texas, but that's not happening. But a lot of superintendents are leaving the profession. A lot of teachers are leaving the profession. Even now, we have a lot of teachers that are just leaving in droves, just resigning. Principals as well, employees across the board in education. It's not just here, sir, it's across California, it's across the nation. It's a really tough time to be in education during COVID, especially, and I hope you don't get offended when I say that, but especially when you're in a district that lacks resources. So one of the struggles that we've had this year is staffing. And our teachers have been crying out because of a shortage of teachers, a shortage of subs, a shortage of paraprofessionals, a shortage of campus security officers, a shortage of principals, a shortage of managers, even at my level. Literally, there's a shortage everywhere. So that's why people are leaving the profession. And I'm finding people who are staying, they love the community that they're in. They're committed to the kids, they love the kids, more importantly, and they're committed. And I'm here, I'm committed, I'm staying because I wanted to be here. My wife and I wanted to be in this community. We prayed about it, we're here, we're not going anywhere.
But you make close to $200,000 a year.
Well, I'll tell you.
Which is perfectly fine. And I'm not here knocking that you don't deserve it.
Right,
I'm just
right.
saying that if I'm a teacher, I live here in Richmond, I commute to Antioch. I love working with kids.
Yeah.
I love giving back to kids. I've taught since I came out of college. I have issues with the country itself systematically. That's the reason why I did not go into corporate America.
Yeah.
So I gave back, and I still give back. I'm 58 years old. But as a young person, why would I tell a young person to teach, and in the end, they're gonna end up getting on the short end of the stick? That's my question.
But I think to my point though, sir, the people who are coming into the teaching profession, one, they want to make a difference in the lives of kids. And what better profession? I mean, you have to really love it. You have to love kids. And like you said, it's definitely not for your pay.
Well, then
It's a
there's no
commitment.
reason to come in it. And if you're not gonna be able to take care of your family,
Well, listen, we're running out of time
if
here,
you
but
can take care of your family, why would I do it?
It's about commitment though, sir.
You said I'm willing it.
Just one thing that I would like to add is that I do think that we have to prioritize teachers and schools and what happens in the classroom. My wife is a second grade teacher here in our district. She's a 4th generation teacher in Richmond. And she knows what it has been the struggle in our community for a long time, and being an educator and loving what you do. And I've seen it. Trustee Smith-Folds and I were both teachers in our schools. We're not anymore, but I mean, she continues to be a teacher to three students at home. But we have to prioritize. We have to be able to lessen the burdens on principals and teachers and classified staff in the schools. And I think that that's what we are trying to do. In the middle of a pandemic, it's almost impossible, though, right? Because all of a sudden, teachers are not just having to concentrate on the academics, which has been the hard part about, even in our board meetings, as Don mentioned, we barely talk about academics because we're having to worry about health and safety. Because we are having, this month alone, we had 500 cases of COVID of students in our schools, 120 staff cases of COVID. And that means teachers are having to be out of the classroom for 2 weeks, right? So when we were already in a shortage. So to answer the question, why would people come here? I mean, the reason why I came here is because our community has an exciting thing going. I mean, our schools are doing amazing things with lack of resources because our community is rich in many other ways, right? Our schools are doing incredible things, and that invites people to them. So to Dr. Hurst's point earlier about how charter schools do a really good job of marketing, we have to do a way better job of marketing, but we do great. Because we're doing incredible things. Richmond High has pathways that many rich communities don't have. Right? Kennedy High School has welding and has different CTE pathways that other places don't have. Our elementary schools like Highland are doing incredible things like project-based learning that many other places don't have. And that invites teachers. We're never going to be the best paid. Never. Unless something happens nationally or statewide that prioritizes education as the #1 thing that should be funded. But we are trying. We are trying to work with our labor partners to do that better and lessen the burdens. If we can't just concentrate on pay, and that should always be part of our priority and strategic plan, we have to figure out what can we take off principals and teachers' concerns that they're having to take care of every day. And that's what we're currently going through. And I think the strategic plan and vision planning that the superintendent is doing right now is going to include a lot of those things that we're going to have to prioritize in the budget for next year. Anyways, hopefully that helps a little.
Well, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, sir.
Well, I want to thank the superintendent, Dr. Hurst, and Demetrio Gonzalez-Hoy, trustee for District 4, for coming in. And thank you all for coming. And the Warriors did win. And, also, for everybody here, I wanted to mention to you guys, trustee and Dr. Hurst, that we are having a career fair here. If you can get your seniors out here, hopefully they have the math skills to get a career. But it's important that we cater to our high school seniors, and that's why we tried to time it so.
We'll definitely share. I wanted to say just a quick thank you to you all because your community also goes above and beyond. I know you all support Highland very much. You guys did a backpack fair where you got backpacks for students. You continue to raise funds for this community. One ask would be if you could help us with writing a letter to Senator Skinner so that she'll give us that grant. That would be really helpful. Individually or as a neighborhood council would be really helpful. But we just wanted to say thank you. Not just for inviting us, and we're happy to come anytime, but because of everything you're doing to support our schools. Like Dr. Hurst mentioned, it does take a village, and it's going to take all of us to get to a place where I think we're already proud, right? But we can all be proud and increase our enrollment, and where people are going to want to come to us, right?
Well, I want to thank the principal and Dr. Hurst once again, and District Representative Boyd.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.